Hello, hello! Happy Saturday to everyone. I am Big Italy 42 here, as always, with the Daily Fantasy Cafe on Air podcast. And I'm here talking about some NBA action. Last night we had some huge performances headlined by DeMarcus Cousins, who I myself said I wasn't paying for on FanDuel, and I did not, so you know how that went for me. 39 and 20 last night. And just an absolute monstrous performance against New Orleans, of all teams. The team that, if anyone should give DeMarcus Cousins trouble, it should be New Orleans. But he absolutely dominated last night, so hat tip to him. And the rest of the Kentucky players had some huge games as well. I mean, you've got John Wall had himself a monster game. Nerlens Noel with a career high of 30 actual points. Filling the stat sheet as he does. And even Tayshaun Prince went for 23 and 7. So Kentucky dominating at both levels right now. But still couldn't beat an NBA team. But another argument for another time. Either way, another guy who had a great performance in a seemingly tough matchup. Absolutely on fire right now. Steph Curry went 33 and 10 against Portland. Now 38 and 10 last night against Memphis. The guy is absolutely in fuego right now. Hit 8 3-pointers last night. James Harden did what he does, 33, 8, and 4 last night. And outside of that, no one else with a super surprising performance outside of Mo Williams. Mo Williams is the really interesting guy here. And what really stood out to me was the fact that he was listed as questionable, and I was ready to play Kemba Walker as much as humanly possible if he sat out. But Kemba Walker was awful from the field once again. In fact, the two guys combined for 11 for 43 in the double overtime game, which is just awful. But Mo Williams, 26, 10, and 9. Huge performance for him last night. Kemba Walker, not a terrible performance, I guess, but in 46 minutes, just 9 points, 10 assists, 3 steals. Did only have 2 turnovers, so that's a plus. But Al Jefferson, the other bright spot there, 31 and 10 for him against Washington. So John Wall, like I mentioned earlier, his numbers were 32, 9, and 6. So monstrous performance there. But enough about last night. Let's get into tonight's action on FanDuel and on DraftKings. We'll run through the lines for you here real quick. And first off, we've got Atlanta at Charlotte, a 2.5-point favorite for Atlanta. 191.5-point total there. New York is a 16.5-point underdog at Chicago. 190.5-point total there. So New York not expected to score a lot of points as usual, as they usually don't. And Golden State at Milwaukee. Golden State a 5-point favorite in this one. 199.5-point total. Actually the second highest total on the night. Seemingly a little bit low, but really isn't. Oklahoma City a 5.5-point favorite at Utah. Was originally a 1.5-point favorite. Now looking at 5.5. Probably because Derek Favors left last night's game as his back locked up. And he's listed as unlikely, doubtful, maybe questionable depending on where you see it. I can't imagine he'll go. So it looks like he's going to be out for tonight. I'll get to that in a minute. 197.5-point total there. Denver at Portland. Denver 8.5-point dog in this one. 207.5-point total. So biggest total of the night and by a decent margin. So going to want to get yourself some exposure there. So without further ado, we're going to kick things off here. Starting at the point guard position. And as he usually is, and now coming at a discount, if you can call it that, at $12,800 on FanDuel, $12,900 on DraftKings. Russell Westbrook tonight against a Utah team who is very good against every position right now. In fact, top 4 against all but power forwards over the past 3 weeks. But Russell Westbrook, we know, highest upside of anyone on the board tonight outside of maybe Steph Curry has close to the same upside. But, I mean, Russell Westbrook tonight, he really hasn't gotten to that level where he's come close to paying off his price tag. Not that he's playing bad by any means, but 55, 49, and 31 fantasy points his last 3 games on FanDuel. Only 26 and 30 minutes in his last 2. That's part of it, but I just can't really justify paying that price tag. Obviously, you're playing multiple tournaments, lineups, you get him, but I don't think he's necessary in cash games. But I wouldn't blame you because there's not a lot of great options at point guard. Elsewhere, you've got Steph Curry. Already mentioned he's on fire. Going up now against Milwaukee, who we know a defensive-minded team. But, I mean, versus Michael Carter-Williams. I know Michael Carter-Williams, big. He's got size. I believe he's about 6'5 or 6'6". But let's think about it. It's Steph Curry, matchup proof. If Golden State needs him tonight, which they might, it's a 5-point spread. It's supposed to be a close game. I expect Steph Curry to do big things once again tonight. Listed at $10,000 on FanDuel and on DraftKings, we get you another discount, $9,400 for Steph Curry tonight. So you can get yourself some Steph Curry, and it's not going to break the bank. Elsewhere at point guard, guy I really like tonight, Ty Lawson. Damian Lillard is giving up a ton of fantasy points right now. In fact, the Blazers are 26th on the season against point guards. Fantasy points allowed 28th over the last 3 weeks. Ty Lawson playing well right now, sitting at $7,200 on FanDuel, $7,000 on DraftKings, coming off of 2 big performances in a row, 36 and 40 fantasy points. So keep an eye out for Ty Lawson. Obviously, very volatile player, got a very low floor, but got a really big ceiling in this one in the biggest total of the game. I will have a lot of Ty Lawson tonight. If you want to take a guess with the Kemba Walker versus Mo Williams, I mean, you can. It's not a great matchup. It's not a terrible matchup. Atlanta right around the middle of the road against point guards. And Jeff Teague with that bad ankle remains to be seen if he'll play tonight. I think they tend to err on the side of caution tonight, and maybe Dennis Schroeder gets another start. But either way, not a particularly tough matchup either way. And Michael Kidd-Gilchrist left last night's game with an injury. He could be out. Not a high usage guy, but he does provide some scoring, so we're going to need to see some guys step up in his absence. And I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe Mo Williams run more time alongside Kemba Walker. So both those guys fairly priced. You've got Kemba Walker at 75 and 72, and Mo Williams at 66 and 6,000 on DraftKings. So nice tournament play for you there. Elsewhere, Damian Lillard obviously in play, but Denver actually #1 against point guards in the last 3 weeks. Ty Lawson, a good defender. I don't know that he's the best defender. He's certainly not the best defender, but numbers right there telling you that that's not a good matchup. But either way, I don't think that Lillard's a terrible play. I don't think he's necessary there at that price, but I'll have myself some exposure in tournaments, especially after the dud last night. Could keep his ownership levels down. Obviously, I already mentioned Dennis Schroeder. If he gets the start, you're playing him. Good matchup against Charlotte. Elsewhere, you can look at Langston Galloway. The Bulls giving up the most points to opposing point guards over the past 3 weeks. So obviously, blowout concern, but New York with no depth, and it really doesn't matter. They don't really have much of a bench anyway, so Galloway should get plenty of run either way. If you're looking down for another cheap guy, I'm really not reaching this low, so that's about the end of it for me here. I mean, you could look at Aaron Brooks because there's not a lot of depth there at point guard either for the Bulls, but really not for me on this short side. I'm not gonna force him in there. I think he's an okay play, but really not going to be playing many Bulls because of that monstrous point spread. Speaking of Bulls, over at shooting guard, Jimmy Butler, $8,400 on FanDuel. DraftKings, as usual, a little bit of a discount, $8,000. And since coming back from injury, he's playing well. 30 and 32 fantasy points in 40 and 39 minutes. But how many minutes will he really need to play tonight? He's not a huge fantasy point per minute performer. Great performer because he gets a ton of minutes. That's where he got his nickname, Jimmy Minutes. But I just don't think he's completely necessary. I do like him in some tournaments if New York can keep this game close. I mean, Jimmy Butler could have himself a fine game against a New York team that really, really struggles against shooting guards. 26th on the season and 23rd over the past 3 weeks. So interesting play there. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek Freak, $7,500 at shooting guard, as you know, and $7,300 at small forward on DraftKings this time. And I think he makes for an interesting play. Second highest total of the night, close 5-point spread. He has that upside. He also doesn't have a great floor, right around 20 fantasy points, but significant upside. And as you'll see during this breakdown here, shooting guard's pretty weak tonight. So don't mind him at all on FanDuel, especially where you have to play 2. Klay Thompson, $6,800 tonight on FanDuel. I mentioned him on the podcast yesterday with Spencer Limbach, and he had a nice game, 33.9 fantasy points in just 27 minutes. And, I mean, 28 real points, so not a lot of peripherals for him there, but you can get him for $7,000 on DraftKings tonight. I think he's a fine play. Nice high floor play with some upside. So I think he's going to be one of the better, more popular shooting guard plays tonight, and rightfully so. Elsewhere, you could look at Dion Waiters, but for me, no thanks. Really not forcing him in. I think he's an awful basketball player, and I can't stand rostering him. I mean, when he's locked into big minutes, yes, he's in play, but he's just an ugly basketball player, so I'm not a big fan there. Randy Foye, here's an interesting play for you. Not playing well right now at all. $4,600 on FanDuel tonight. Over on DraftKings, he's $4,800. And like I mentioned, pretty bad actually over his last 3 games. And assuming that he plays, he's had a couple rest days recently. But Portland, one of the worst teams in the entire NBA right now against shooting guards since Wesley Matthews went down. 29th over the last 3 weeks. So, interesting play there. Will Barton also plays some shooting guard, but his price up over $5K on FanDuel, playing low 20s in minutes. I'd much rather go with Randy Foye. Tournament only, of course, but some upside, and he's got a nice matchup. Aaron Aflalo is a popular play some nights, and I'm going to put it this way. Denver is ranked 28th against shooting guards for the season and over the past 3 weeks, and if I had to rank starting shooting guards, I'm probably putting Aaron Aflalo about 28th. So for me, no thanks. You can have your Aflalo and take it far, far away from me because no thanks. Aaron Aflalo is just, he's abysmal right now. He's not producing at all, getting huge opportunity, but just doing absolutely nothing on the court. No thanks for me. He's pretty much just a fill-in. He just stands there for most of the time, so no thanks for me. Elijah Millsap's been a nice value play. Only played 17 minutes last night, but 24 fantasy points, so high risk, decent, medium reward side, I guess, here. But with Derek Favors out, maybe he ends up seeing some extra minutes. You've got an injury also to Rodney Hood, who did not travel with the team, so he's going to be out. So should be some minutes, maybe low 20s there for Millsap. I think he's an okay play, but nobody else I'm really forcing in there. Gerald Henderson. Now this is a DraftKings specific play because he's a small forward on FanDuel, and he's a guy that I'm really looking at tonight. Against an Atlanta team that's 22nd against shooting guards over the last 3 weeks. And he makes for a really interesting play. And he's one of those guys that plays well under the radar and no one talks about him. So, with Kid Gilchrist out, maybe he sees some extra time. Maybe he runs some time in the 3. And over 30 fantasy points in 2 straight games. So, obviously, last night a double overtime game. But he only played 3 more minutes than he did the previous game with the double overtime. So, I like him a good deal. $5,200 at shooting guard on DraftKings and $5,400 at small forward on FanDuel. So I think he's a nice play. Always seems to go under the radar. So I'm a big fan there. All right, moving on to the 3, a.k.a. small forward here. Gordon Hayward is my pick of choice here. And he's playing well. Just came off the injury. Came back to the 24, 7-3 line against Denver. And sitting at $8,000 on FanDuel, $7,600 on DraftKings. He has a very nice matchup against an OKC team, 26th in the NBA against small forwards over the past 3 weeks. And, I mean, you really don't have anyone to throw at him. You've got Kyle Singler and company. I mean, it's bad. OKC not playing great defense. Russell Westbrook kind of picking up defensively. Enes Kanter and Steven Adams down low are pretty tough to deal with. But you've got a guy here, Gordon Hayward, can kind of do it all. I'm a huge fan of his tonight. He's by far my top option at small forward. Elsewhere, you've got Nicholas Batum and a great matchup against the Denver team. It's bottom 5 against small forwards throughout the season and the last 3 weeks. So he's a fine play, sitting at $6,800 on DraftKings, or on FanDuel at $6,500 on DraftKings. You could look at Chris Middleton. Remember, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, he's switched. So small forward on FanDuel, shooting guard on DraftKings. Getting big minutes, hasn't had one of those big games since that 55-minute triple overtime performance against Brooklyn. Excuse me. But, I mean, he's a big upside guy, so you like him in some tournaments. Danilo Gallinari has a high usage rate now, and he's in a fine spot if he's sitting there at the 2, especially against Portland. So I think he's in a fine spot there at $6,700 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he is $6,400. So don't mind you if you go there. Also, DeMarre Carroll. This is a guy I'll be pairing up most of the spots here with Gordon Hayward on FanDuel. He's playing great basketball right now. 36 fantasy points in his last game against Miami. In a tough matchup against Luol Deng. And now he gets Charlotte minus MKG, who was their best defender, who also plays small forward. So, DeMarre Carroll, I think, opened up for a great opportunity tonight. I like him quite a bit. So, he'll be a nice cash game play, and I don't mind him in tournaments either. If you're looking down a little bit cheaper, Andre Iguodala is resting today, so doesn't change a whole lot for me. But obviously, he's out of play. He's kind of out of play on FanDuel anyway at his price for me. If you want a really sneaky guy, and obviously tons of inherent risk in this one, but Clee Anthony early just came back from injury. Last 2 games, 25 minutes, 22 fantasy points, 29 minutes, 24 fantasy points. listed at $3,600 on FanDuel and minimum price on DraftKings. So if you want an all-risk, all-reward type play, there you go. Clee Anthony early right there and what should be a blowout. And Chicago actually pretty bad against small forwards right now. 22nd over the past 3 weeks. So I don't mind him at all in some tournaments. Certainly not a cash game play there, though. Power forward. And speaking of power, LaMarcus Aldridge, the man with 3 injured hands somehow over here, just getting it done. 43 fantasy points last time out against Phoenix. Sitting at $9,400 on FanDuel is expensive, but we know how bad that Denver front court is. Worst on the season against power forwards, 25th over the last 3 weeks. LaMarcus Aldridge has huge upside here, and it's a fairly big spread, 8.5, so that's a little bit concerning. But, I mean, you look at Aldridge, he takes a ton of shots, took 26 last game, and a matchup doesn't get any better than this. You can get him at $8,700 on DraftKings. Got to be the top option. Obviously, Pau Gasol not going to see much resistance at all down low from New York, but like I mentioned, 16.5 point spread. That's just a little bit much for me to pay $9,000 for Pau Gasol tonight. So tournament only there. Play him. You hope the Knicks can keep it close and just let him go for his 25 and 15 that he's almost destined to get if he sees the fourth quarter tonight. Paul Millsap. Talked about him last night. Thought he was a little bit risky. Teague, as Spencer called, Teague was the one that ended up sitting. And Millsap had another big game. 41 fantasy points. The guy does it all. $8,200 starting to get a little pricey on FanDuel. Don't mind him there at all, of course. But over on DraftKings, $7,300. A tremendous price for him against Charlotte. Missing Cody Zeller. And they're really not any good against power forwards this season. Anyway, they're sitting at 19th on the season. So I like him a great deal. Like I mentioned, Derek Favors probably won't play today. I'd be surprised if he does. You look at Nikola Mirotic, $7,400 on FanDuel, and over on DraftKings, he's sitting at $7,000. So nice tournament play for you there. We know the kind of upside this guy has when he gets hot. But my favorite play, dollar for dollar at power forward. I called him Mr. Consistency earlier in the week. Got a little bit of a backlash, but he is absolutely Mr. Consistency right now. Ersan Ilyasova, $6,000. And we've mentioned this also on the podcast. Golden State has struggled against power forwards recently. They are 23rd over the past 3 weeks. And Ersan, last 4 games, 40, 21, 42, 48 fantasy points on FanDuel. $6,000 on FanDuel, $6,700 on DraftKings. Absolutely love Ersan Ilyasova tonight. Elsewhere at power forward, not a lot of guys that I absolutely love. If you want to reach, you can go down to Mitch McGary if you want. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I guess you could do worse. He's very, very risky. Trevor Booker should get some run, assuming that Derek Favors is out. So he makes for a great cheap play. Still doesn't really ever play more than 20 to 25 minutes, but did put up 25 fantasy points in his last game. So $3,500 on FanDuel, I think he makes for a fine play, and $3,200 on DraftKings. If you need a cheap play, assuming that Favors is out, he's the way to go. Nobody else I really like here at power forward. There's some guys you can kind of force in there, but really not for me on a 5-game slate. Moving on to center, and the double factor here for Enes Kanter. He's already playing well. He's already a guy you love to play. Now he's going against his old team, the team that shipped him out of town, and basically said, you're not part of our future. He now is the future, and OKC playing tremendous basketball. If you don't be a slave to the game logs here, his last game, 26 fantasy points, but it was a 16 and 10 double-double in just 22 minutes against the Spurs. I like him tonight despite the tough matchup against Rudy Gobert. I like to think there's some extra motivation. I think those two are going to go at it. I think they both make for great plays. Kanter at $7,100 on FanDuel, $75 on DraftKings. Gobert at $8,200 and $8,100 on DraftKings. So, nice play there as well. Big Al Jefferson playing well. And Atlanta actually 21st against centers over the last 3 weeks. So, you could look his way at $7,700 on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, it's $6,700. Still a very, very cheap price. So, you could definitely look his way. If you're looking cheap, you can keep looking. I don't like anyone cheap tonight. Not a big fan of any of these guys. If I have to pick one, it would be Robin Lopez against that weak Denver front court. But that's it for me. Zaza Pachulia, his price at $6,200, really getting out of control on FanDuel. He's shown big upside, but kind of a risky play. And, Golden State's still a very good defensive team. So I'm not trying to force anyone in there too much tonight, despite that close game. So He's a tournament-only option for me. Well, that about wraps it up here for this Saturday. I appreciate you hanging out with me here. And check out great content we have at dailyfantasycafe.com. I'm at BigItaly42. Our Twitter account is at DFCafe. And I will see everyone again on Monday. I'm checking out.